One cold Los Angeles night, Keanu Reeves noticed his longtime maid sneaking out with trembling hands and a worn canvas bag. Curiosity turned to concern as he quietly followed her through the dark streets. But when he discovered where she was going and who was waiting, inside his entire understanding of compassion would change forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain had stopped just before midnight, leaving the streets of Los Angeles slick and quiet. Inside his hillside home, Keanu Reeves sat alone in his study, a single lamp casting a soft glow over scattered pages of a movie script he'd been reviewing. But he wasn't reading anymore. His eyes lingered on the same line for minutes at a time, his mind restless, his heart oddly uneasy. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual, almost watchful. For years, this home had been his sanctuary, a place of stillness after long days on set, where his small staff moved with quiet professionalism and kindness. Lucia Alvarez, his longtime maid, was the heart of that peace. She was in her early 60s, gentle and tireless, always humming old Spanish lullabies as she worked. She treated his house not as a job, but as a promise, a space kept warm and human in a city often cold and indifferent. That's why, when Keanu heard the faint creak of the side door just after midnight, his instincts immediately stirred. Lucia never left the house this late. She had always been careful, predictable, the kind of person who folded dish towels in perfect squares and left lights off to save electricity. But tonight, something was different. He moved quietly to the window that overlooked the side path. There, in the pale wash of the porch light, he saw her wearing her worn gray coat, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, clutching an extra, old canvas bag to her chest like something precious. She glanced around nervously before slipping into the night. For a moment, he told himself to leave it alone. She deserved her privacy. Maybe she had a personal errand, maybe something urgent. But another thought lingered. Lucia didn't drive. Her arthritis made long walks painful. And this was Los Angeles, not a place where people wandered quiet streets at 1 a.m. without a reason. Something in him shifted. He rose from his desk, grabbed his jacket, and followed. Not as the actor everyone recognized, but as a man who felt a pull deeper than curiosity, a sense that something was wrong. The streets were nearly empty, the city's noise softened under the weight of damp air. He kept a careful distance, walking far enough behind that she wouldn't notice him, staying close enough to not lose her. Her pace was slow, but determined. At every corner, she looked over her shoulder, clutching her bag tighter each time. Keanu's thoughts swirled. In all the years she'd worked for him, Lucia had never asked for a loan, never complained, never shared much about her personal life. He only knew small pieces: a daughter who had died young, a few cousins back in Mexico, a church she used to attend. But she'd always smiled when asked how she was doing. Now, that same woman looked like she was carrying a secret that was breaking her apart. He followed her past the quiet rows of sleeping houses, through a dimly lit park, and across an old bridge where rainwater dripped from the rails like falling time. She stopped once under a street lamp, breathing heavily, then pressed forward into a narrow alley. Keanu hesitated for a moment. The alley looked deserted, lined with dumpsters and graffiti. But the feeling in his chest, a strange blend of worry and intuition, pushed him onward. That's when he saw her disappear through a side door in a small, crumbling building. It looked abandoned, the kind of place people forgot about. A flicker of light glowed faintly from inside. Keanu paused at the edge of the alley, his breath visible in the cool air. Every instinct told him this was none of his business. Yet another voice, quieter but stronger, told him that if he turned away now, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. He pulled his hood over his head and moved closer. The night that would change everything had just begun. Keanu pressed his back against the brick wall beside the door, listening. The faint hum of voices drifted through the cracks, soft, gentle, almost rhythmic. It wasn't fear he heard. It was care. Lucia's voice, low and soothing, spoke in Spanish. He caught fragments he barely understood. Words like niños and seguro, children, safe. His pulse quickened. He pushed the door slightly, just enough to peek inside. The faint glow of a lantern revealed the interior of an old elementary classroom, desks pushed aside, windows covered with torn curtains. A makeshift kitchen setup rested in the corner, a single pot simmering on a portable stove. And then he saw them. Small figures curled in blankets on the floor, at least 10, maybe more. Children. Sleeping. Lucia moved between them like a mother bird checking her nest. She adjusted a blanket here, tucked in a little girl there, brushed a strand of hair from another child's forehead. The way she moved told a story of exhaustion, fear, and fierce love. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. Why was she here? Who were these children? His mind flooded with possibilities. Runaways, refugees, something darker. But as he watched Lucia kneel beside a small boy who had started coughing, every doubt faded. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was protecting them. He stepped back quietly, his hand gripping the doorframe. This wasn't the kind of secret people hid for selfish reasons. It was the kind that came from sacrifice. A noise echoed from the street, a car door slamming shut. Lucia froze. The children stirred. She whispered something sharp, motioning for them to stay quiet. Her eyes darted toward the entrance. Keanu ducked behind a dumpster as headlights swept across the alley. A dark van slowed near the building, its engine idling low. One of them opened the door and stepped out, scanning the alley with the kind of slow, deliberate motion that made Keanu's skin crawl. Lucia peeked through a crack in the curtain. She looked terrified. The man outside muttered something in Spanish, his tone sharp, angry. He kicked the trash can near the door, listening for movement. The van's lights clicked off, and the alley fell back into darkness. Keanu's instincts flared. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew danger when he saw it. He pulled out his phone, ready to call for help, then hesitated. Calling 911 might draw too much attention, and Lucia, she clearly didn't want anyone to know. When the van finally rolled away, Keanu waited until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then he approached the side door again. Lucia stood there, trembling, clutching the frame. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw him. "Mr. Reeves," she whispered, voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, words caught in his throat. "I could ask you the same thing, Lucia." Her face went pale. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint hum of the broken light above filled the silence. And then, very quietly, Lucia said something that made Keanu's heart stop. "They'll kill them if anyone finds out." The words hung in the air like a knife's edge. "They'll kill them if anyone finds out." Keanu felt a chill crawl up his spine. Lucia's hand shook as she pulled him inside, closing the door softly behind them. Her eyes darted around the room, making sure none of the children had woken. A few shifted in their sleep, unaware of the storm brewing outside. Keanu spoke in a whisper. "Who are they, Lucia?" Her lips trembled before she answered. "They have no one. Some came across the border. Some ran away from bad people. I found them on the streets, behind restaurants, near bus stations. No one helps them, Mr. Reeves, so I do what I can." She looked down, her voice cracking. "But the men who came tonight, they want them back. They sell them. They hurt them." The weight of her confession hit him like a physical blow. The dim light flickered, shadows moving across the peeling walls, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Keanu's jaw tightened. He'd seen horror in films, but this was real. These were children sleeping on concrete floors while predators prowled outside their door. He crouched near one of the sleeping children, a girl no older than 7, clutching a worn teddy bear missing an ear. Her breathing was uneven, her small frame fragile. He reached into his pocket and found a folded piece of candy. When he placed it beside her hand, something inside him broke and healed at the same time. Lucia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't want to drag you into this," she said softly. You've done so much for me already, but I can't stop. If I don't feed them, they'll starve. If I don't hide them, they'll be taken again." He turned toward her, his expression calm but resolute. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Lucia's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. These people, they have money, power. They're not afraid of police. If they find out you were here," Keanu interrupted gently, "then they'll find out someone's watching back." For a moment, she just stared at him, caught between gratitude and fear. The rain started again outside, tapping lightly against the boarded windows. It sounded almost like a heartbeat. Keanu looked around the room one last time. "We'll get them to safety," he said quietly. "All of them." Lucia shook her head. "It's not that simple." He gave her a small, steady smile. "Nothing worth doing ever is." When he stepped outside a few minutes later, the cool night air hit his face, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and danger. He stood under the flickering streetlight, looking back at the old building, its windows glowing faintly in the dark like a secret candle. In that moment, Keanu Reeves knew his life had just crossed a line. The quiet existence he'd built was gone. What waited ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and deeply human. But as he walked back toward his car, one thought echoed in his mind, like a promise. He wasn't going to let those children disappear. The following night came sooner than Keanu expected. Sleep had escaped him again, replaced by a gnawing unease that refused to quiet down. The images of Lucia and those frightened children replayed in his mind like a film he couldn't stop. Every blink brought back her trembling hands, the whisper in her voice, and the terror in her eyes when she said they'd kill them if anyone found out. He had promised himself not to interfere too soon. He needed to understand what he was walking into. But as midnight neared, that same instinct that had driven him the first night returned stronger, sharper. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lucia was going back there. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the faint creak of the side door echoed again. He stood at the top of the stairs, hidden by shadows, watching Lucia slip out of the house just as she had before. Her old gray coat hung heavy on her shoulders. The same canvas bag was clutched tightly in her arms. This time, Keanu was ready. He waited until she reached the end of the street, then followed at a careful distance in his old black pickup, an unremarkable vehicle he used to avoid attention. The streets were quiet, the air thick with mist. Lucia walked with purpose, her shoes tapping faintly on the wet pavement until she reached a bus stop near Sunset Boulevard. She stood under the flickering light, shivering slightly as she waited. When the bus pulled up, Keanu parked far enough back that he could still see the reflection of her coat in the rear window. She boarded, paid in cash, and took a seat near the back. The bus groaned and began its long journey eastward. He trailed behind, headlights dimmed, moving from the quiet luxury of Beverly Hills into the tougher, older neighborhoods of East LA. The transition was stark. Clean sidewalks gave way to cracked asphalt. Neon signs buzzed above corner stores, and stray dogs crossed empty intersections. The city seemed to shed its glamour the farther they went, revealing a side most people ignored. Inside the bus, Lucia sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the darkness outside. She didn't look scared, only resigned. Keanu watched from behind, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. He wondered who she really was. For 3 years she had worked for him, yet she had revealed almost nothing about herself. No photos of family, no visitors, no mention of a husband or children. He had assumed she lived a quiet life, maybe lonely but stable. Now he realized how little he knew. He thought about the little things she did without being asked. The way she left his coffee brewing each morning before he woke. The way she hummed soft Spanish hymns while sweeping the kitchen, melodies that somehow made the house feel alive. The way she placed small wild flowers from the garden in a mason jar on his table every Monday. He had always taken it as kindness. Now, that same kindness carried the weight of something deeper, something she never spoke of. As Keanu followed the slow-moving bus through the darkened streets, memories of Lucia's quiet grace returned one by one. He remembered her first day 3 years ago, arriving with her hair pulled into a neat bun, her accent soft but clear when she greeted him. She had spoken little, then only what was necessary. but her eyes had shone with humility and focus. Over time, she had become a steady presence in his life. When work grew overwhelming, when headlines dragged his name through the mud, when loneliness echoed too loudly in his empty house, Lucia's quiet routines had been an anchor. Now that anchor was leading him into a world he didn't recognize. The bus slowed to a stop near a rundown intersection lined with shuttered stores and graffiti-covered walls. Streetlights flickered uncertainly, their light fractured by cracked glass. Lucia stepped off, pulling her coat tighter around her and glancing over her shoulder. Keanu parked a few blocks behind and killed the engine, watching as she turned down a narrow side street that sloped downhill. The area felt forgotten, empty lots, broken fences, and walls sprayed with years of color layered like scars. He kept a careful distance, walking quietly as her silhouette moved ahead under the dim yellow glow of a single streetlight. The air smelled of damp concrete and old oil. A stray cat darted across his path, vanishing into a pile of trash bags. Lucia's pace quickened as she neared an alley that disappeared between two abandoned buildings. Keanu hesitated at the corner, his heart thudding against his ribs. He could hear faint voices somewhere beyond, low and hurried. For a moment, he thought about turning back. Maybe he was crossing a line. Maybe she'd never forgive him if she knew he was following her again. But then he remembered the fear in her eyes, the night before, the way she'd said those children would die if anyone found out. That wasn't the fear of guilt. It was the fear of losing something sacred. He crept forward. At the end of the alley, the street opened up to an old industrial lot. A single bus bench stood under a flickering light. Lucia sat there, waiting, her bag on her lap. She looked smaller somehow, swallowed by the night. Minutes passed. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, a teenage boy with a hood pulled over his head. Lucia stood and spoke to him in rapid Spanish. The boy nodded, glancing nervously around. She reached into her bag and handed him something, a wrapped bundle of food and a folded blanket. The boy's face lit up with relief. He whispered, "Gracias," clutching the items to his chest before hurrying back into the dark. Keanu's chest tightened. Lucia wasn't running away. She was helping. The realization hit him hard. This woman, who had cleaned his home in silence for years, was spending her nights feeding strangers' children. Maybe while he'd been too distracted by scripts, meetings, and headlines to notice the quiet hero in his own house. Lucia stayed seated on the bench long after the boy disappeared into the dark. The streets were silent, except for the hum of the flickering streetlight above her. Keanu watched from the corner, his breath slow, his heart uneasy. Something about the way she sat motionless, hands folded tightly over her bag, made him realize she wasn't finished. She was waiting for someone else. Minutes crawled by before another sound broke the stillness, the rattle of an old van pulling up nearby. Its headlights cut across the cracked pavement, briefly illuminating Lucia's face. She didn't flinch. The van stopped beside her, and two men stepped out. They were rough-looking, their movements sharp and confident. One was tall with a scar cutting across his cheek, the other broad-shouldered with a heavy limp. Keanu instinctively moved closer, hiding behind a rusted metal fence. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. The men approached Lucia, speaking in low, aggressive tones. Though he couldn't make out every word, the tension in their voices was unmistakable. Lucia's voice trembled as she spoke back, trying to reason with them. The taller man took a step forward, his hand jerking toward her bag. Keanu clenched his fists, every instinct screaming to intervene, but he forced himself to stay still, watching, waiting. Finally, the man snatched the bag from Lucia's grasp. She gasped, pleading, trying to explain, but the men ignored her. They opened it, rummaged through the contents: bread, canned food, small bottles of water, bandages, and a few crumpled bills. The scarred man cursed under his breath and threw the bag at her feet. Then came a phrase that chilled Keanu to the bone. "You're stealing from us," the man hissed in Spanish. "You think we don't know you've been hiding them?" Lucia's reply was faint. "They're just children." The man's hand shot out, gripping her by the arm. "Their property," he growled. Keanu took a step forward before he realized what he was doing. Every nerve in his body was alive, every instinct screaming to protect her. But before he could act, the second man intervened, pulling the first back. They argued for a moment, their voices rising, and then the one with the limp spat on the ground and shoved Lucia away. "Next time," he warned, "we won't just talk." The van doors slammed, and the vehicle sped off, tires screeching into the night. Lucia sank to the ground, clutching her arm, shaking but silent. Keanu exhaled the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His hands trembled as he stepped out from the shadows. He wanted to rush to her, to help, but something told him she needed a moment to gather herself. When she finally stood, she looked down the empty street with tears glistening in her eyes. Tears of fear and fury mixed together. She picked up the bag, dusted it off, and whispered something he barely heard. "I won't stop." In that instant, Keanu knew this was no ordinary act of charity. Lucia Alvarez was fighting a war that no one saw, and now he was part of it, whether he liked it or not. The following night, Lucia repeated her silent routine, leaving the house after midnight with her canvas bag, locking the door gently behind her. This time, Keanu didn't hesitate. He followed from a distance, headlights off, the weight of what he'd witnessed the night before still heavy in his chest. Those men, their threats, the way she'd refused to stop, he knew she was walking into danger again. The bus ride was shorter this time. Lucia disembarked near an old industrial district where the city's glow faded into dim orange streetlights. Ahead stood a crumbling chain-link fence wrapped around what once had been an elementary school. The sign above the gate was faded and cracked, Street Mary's Learning Center. The letters peeled like old paint, half swallowed by ivy. Keanu parked his car on the opposite side of the street and watched as Lucia approached the gate. She glanced over her shoulder once, scanning the dark corners of the block. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small key. She unlocked the gate, pushed it open just wide enough to slip through, and disappeared into the shadows beyond. Keanu's breath fogged the cold air. A dozen thoughts collided in his head. He could turn back, pretend he saw nothing, but something deep in his gut refused to let him move. He stepped out of the truck and crossed the street quietly. The gate creaked as he eased it open. The courtyard beyond was silent, except for the distant hum of the city and the rustle of leaves moving through broken windows. The place felt frozen in time. Rusted swings swayed slightly in the breeze, and a half-collapsed jungle gym leaned toward the cracked pavement. Faded murals of smiling children lined the brick walls, ghosts of a happier past. He walked slowly, his footsteps crunching over shards of glass and fallen plaster. Every sound echoed down the hollow corridors. Faintly, somewhere deep inside, he heard it, a light rhythmic tapping. Then came a whisper. Voice, followed by another. Children. He stopped cold, pressing his back against the wall near a half-open door. The sound was unmistakable now. Small voices, soft laughter, a few muffled coughs. The realization hit him like ice water. He inched forward and peered through a narrow crack in the cafeteria door. At first, all he could see was the flicker of candlelight dancing across peeling walls. Then, his eyes adjusted. Rows of old cafeteria tables had been pushed together, covered with thin blankets. On those makeshift beds lay at least a dozen children, sleeping close to one another for warmth. Some were wrapped in worn quilts, others in coats far too large for their small bodies. A lump rose in Keanu's throat. His pulse quickened. He scanned the room. Lucia knelt near a portable heater in the corner, adjusting its setting while whispering softly to one of the children awake beside her. The boy, maybe 8 years old, clutched a stuffed bear, missing an eye. Lucia brushed his hair back and smiled gently. Keanu watched silently, frozen in place, as Lucia moved from one sleeping child to another, checking their blankets and adjusting small pillows made of folded clothes. She worked with a tenderness that made his chest ache. Every motion was careful, loving, like a mother tending to her own children. He noticed how thin some of them were. Their faces were pale, their hair tangled. A few bore fading bruises that no child should ever have to explain. One little girl, no more than 6, stirred in her sleep and whispered something in Spanish. Lucia immediately bent close, her voice low and soothing, singing the same Spanish hymn she used to hum while cleaning his kitchen. The melody floated through the air like a fragile prayer. Keanu's throat tightened. The scene before him was both heartbreaking and beautiful. This wasn't a crime scene, it was a sanctuary, a secret refuge built out of desperation and compassion. He took a step back from the door, his hand pressing against the cold wall for balance. He understood now why she'd lied, why she risked everything. Those children weren't strays. They were survivors hidden from the same kind of men he'd seen threaten her the night before. Lucia's quiet voice broke through his thoughts. "Shh, duérmete, mi amor. You're safe now," she whispered to a trembling boy who had started crying in his sleep. The child clung to her hand, and slowly his breathing steadied. Then, Keanu saw something that made his breath catch. Against the far wall hung a tattered corkboard. On it were photographs, some old, some new. Smiling faces of missing children, clipped from newspapers and printed from websites. Beneath each photo, Lucia had scrawled handwritten notes. Found safe. Still searching. Praying for answers. He recognized some of the names from news headlines, cases that had vanished from the public eye. And here, in this forgotten corner of Los Angeles, one woman was still searching for them. Lucia stood and reached for her bag. She pulled out a loaf of bread, peanut butter, canned soup, bottles of water, and a small medical kit. Her hands moved methodically as she prepared meals, portioning them carefully so everyone would have enough in the morning. Her movements told a story of repetition, of years spent doing this alone. Keanu leaned against the doorway, wrestling with his emotions. He had met countless activists in his life, spoken on stages about compassion and justice, but he had never seen anything like this one person operating in complete secrecy, giving everything she had to save the forgotten. A sudden creak of wood echoed through the hallway behind him. He turned sharply, heart pounding. The sound was faint but real. Someone else was there. He looked through the cafeteria window again. Lucia froze too, her hand hovering over the table. Their eyes met across the dark corridor, fear flashing in hers. Then, from the far end of the hall, a door slammed shut. Lucia's head snapped toward the sound, her face draining of color. She whispered something quickly to the older children, and in an instant, they moved with quiet discipline. The smallest ones were led behind an old storage curtain, while two older boys pushed a metal cabinet against the cafeteria door. The fear in their eyes was instinctual, practiced. This had happened before. Keanu's pulse hammered. He crouched behind a broken locker, scanning the corridor. Another faint noise echoed down the hall, a shuffle of heavy boots, then a low voice in Spanish, calling out mockingly, "Lucia, we know you're here." The words hit him like ice. It was the same voice he'd heard outside the bodega 2 nights ago. The scarred man. The one who had called the children property. Lucia pressed her back against the cafeteria wall, clutching the cross pendant at her neck. Keanu saw her hand trembling, but her expression hardened. She motioned for the children to stay silent. Then she moved toward the kitchen door at the back, her eyes darting to the shadows, calculating escape routes. Keanu had seen danger before, but nothing like this. Nothing that involved innocent lives, this small and helpless. He moved quietly along the hallway, keeping low, every sense alive. The voices drew closer. "Check the rooms," one of the men barked. "She comes here every few nights." Keanu gritted his teeth. He could leave now, slip out unseen, but one glance through the cafeteria crack stopped him. Lucia was still there, shielding the children with her body, whispering prayers under her breath. He couldn't walk away. The men's flashlights sliced through the hallway, beams of white cutting across the peeling walls. Keanu waited until they passed, then moved silent, focused. He followed their footsteps until he saw their silhouettes. 2 men, both armed. The scarred one carried a baseball bat. The other, smaller but twitchy, gripped a chain in his hand. They stopped near the cafeteria door. "She's in here," the tall one muttered. "I heard them." Keanu stepped forward from the shadows before he could talk himself out of it. His voice was steady. "You don't want to do that." Both men spun around, startled. Their flashlights hit him full in the face. The scarred man squinted, then sneered. "Who the hell are you?" Keanu stood still, the dim light catching his calm expression. "Someone who won't let you touch her." The smaller man laughed, swinging the chain. "Big mistake, old man." The chain lashed through the air, but Keanu sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted hard. The chain clattered to the floor. Before the other could react, Keanu shoved the first one against the wall. Years of training and movie stunts weren't just acting, they'd taught him real control. "Leave," he said firmly. "Now." The scarred man cursed, backing toward the exit. "This isn't over." He pointed a finger. "You'll regret getting involved." Keanu didn't respond. He waited until their footsteps faded into the distance before turning back toward the cafeteria. When Lucia opened the door, her eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Keanu looked past her at the children peeking from behind the curtain. "Neither should they," he said softly. And in that moment, both of them understood whatever secret she'd been carrying, he was part of it now. Lucia's trembling hands steadied as she ladled steaming soup into small tin bowls. The rich smell of chicken broth filled the cold cafeteria, softening the edges of the night. Around her, about 15 children sat at the old cafeteria tables, their faces illuminated by strands of string lights taped to the cracked walls. The lights hummed gently, powered by a small generator tucked behind a pile of broken chairs. Keanu stood near the doorway, watching in silence. His heart was still pounding from the confrontation moments earlier, but the scene before him calmed him in an unexpected way. The children, thin, tired, but alive, looked up at Lucia as though she were a miracle. And in a way, she was. Each child moved with quiet obedience, waiting their turn, holding mismatched bowls and cups. Some were barefoot, others wrapped in donated sweaters 2 sizes too large. Keanu could see the scars on their arms, their faces, their eyes. Not all were physical. These were children who had lived too long in fear. Lucia moved between them with maternal ease, whispering in Spanish, "Despacio, mi amor. There's enough for everyone." Her voice carried the rhythm of peace, as if every word was a promise. When a little girl spilled her soup, Lucia didn't scold her. She simply knelt down, cleaned the spill with her own sleeve, and smiled. "It's okay. You're safe now." Keanu felt something deep inside shift. He'd spent decades acting as heroes, rescuing the helpless on screen. But this quiet act of feeding the frightened and forgotten, was more heroic than any role he had ever played. He looked around the room, taking in the details that told the rest of the story. There were drawings on the wall, crayon sketches of suns, flowers, houses, and stick figures labeled Mama. Beneath one of the drawings, a child had written in shaky handwriting, "Gracias, Señora Lucia." He turned to her. "How long have you been doing this?" Lucia didn't look up. 3 years, she said softly, handing a bowl to a boy with hollow eyes. "Every few days, sometimes every night, depends on who needs food or a bed." "Where do they come from?" he asked. She hesitated. "From everywhere. Some from shelters, some from the streets, some from worse." Keanu felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Worse?" Lucia's gaze dropped to the floor. "Traffickers," she whispered. "People who take children and sell them like things." Her voice cracked, but she quickly steadied it, brushing a child's hair from his face. "They escape when they can. I find them before the streets do." Keanu's breath caught. He had suspected something dark, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way he wasn't ready for. "And you do all this alone?" Lucia shook her head slowly. "Not alone. God helps. The children help each other. But yes, mostly me." Her words were soft, but they carried an iron weight that silenced the room. Keanu looked around once more, seeing not just children, but survivors. Keanu stepped further into the room, his shoes making faint echoes across the linoleum floor. The children turned to look at him, curious but cautious. Lucia glanced back nervously, unsure how to explain his presence. But when she saw the gentleness in his eyes, she gave a small nod, a silent message to them that he could be trusted. Keanu knelt beside a small boy, sitting alone with his soup. The child couldn't have been more than 7. He had wide, watchful eyes and a bruise fading along his cheek. "Hey there," Keanu said softly. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his spoon frozen midair. "Carlos," he murmured. "That's a strong name," Keanu said with a small smile. "How long have you been here, Carlos?" The boy looked to Lucia before answering. "A few weeks. Miss Lucia found me behind a gas station." His voice was faint but steady. "She gave me food and a blanket. Said I didn't have to go back." Keanu's chest tightened. "Go back where?" Carlos's lips pressed together. He looked away, staring down at his bowl. "The man who kept us. He said if I ran, he'd find me. He always does." Lucia placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No one will find you here, mi amor," she said softly. "You're safe." The boy nodded, his body relaxing slightly under her touch. Keanu looked at Lucia, his sass, throat tight. "You're protecting them from human traffickers?" Lucia nodded, her eyes weary but resolute. "Some are born into it, others are taken. The police try, but the system." She stopped, shaking her head. "Too slow, too blind. I couldn't just clean houses and pretend not to see, so I did what I could." Keanu exhaled, struggling to process it all. "You're risking your life." She looked up, her gaze steady. "What life is worth keeping if you don't use it to save another?" The simplicity of her words struck him harder than any speech he'd ever heard. The generator buzzed quietly, filling the silence that followed. Lucia walked to a corner shelf, stacked with supplies, bandages, antibiotics, toothbrushes, and water jugs. Keanu realized she had built this place from nothing, using scraps and donations to create a sanctuary. "Where do you get all this?" he asked. "Friends," she replied. "A church gives food sometimes. A nurse brings medicine when she can. Most of it I buy with my paycheck from your house." Keanu's breath caught. "You use your salary for this?" She smiled faintly. "Money means nothing if it can't feed a child." Before he could respond, a faint rumble shook the windows. A vehicle stopped outside. Lucia froze, every muscle tense. The children seemed to sense it too. Spoons dropped, chatter vanished. Then the back door banged open. A teenage boy burst in, panting, his eyes wide with panic. "They found us," he gasped. "They're coming." The room erupted in whispers of fear. Lucia dropped her ladle, her face going pale. Keanu stood tall, already moving toward the door. "Who's coming?" The boy's voice shook. "The men from the van." Lucia's heart seemed to stop for a beat, her hand gripping the edge of the table for balance. The sound of the boy's breathless warning hung heavy in the air. Around them, the children froze, eyes wide, some trembling so hard their spoons rattled against the bowls. The warmth of the room vanished in an instant, replaced by the cold, electric pulse of fear. "Lucia, how close are they?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but sharp. The teenage boy gasped between words. "They're right behind me. I saw their headlights turn onto the street. It's them, the same ones who were watching last week." Lucia moved into action, her fear buried beneath the force of instinct. "Everyone, to your places," she said quickly in Spanish. Quietly, now. The older children knew what to do. They began ushering the younger ones toward the back of the cafeteria, pulling up a loose section of floor where a wooden panel had been pried open. Beneath it was a hidden crawl space lined with blankets and plastic tubs of water. The smaller children crawled inside, without a sound. Keanu watched in astonishment as the organized chaos unfolded. "You've done this before," he said under his breath. Lucia nodded grimly. "Too many times." She hurried to the generator, flicking off the power. The room plunged into darkness except for a few faint emergency candles. "They can't see the lights from outside," she whispered. Footsteps echoed faintly beyond the walls, boots crunching on gravel. A car door slammed. Keanu's muscles tightened. "Lucia," he said quietly, "how do they keep finding you?" Her voice was low. "They have lookouts. The traffickers watch the neighborhoods. They follow the kids who run. Sometimes the kids are too scared to tell me they were tracked. Sometimes they lead them right to us without knowing." The thought made his stomach twist. "We can't stay here," he said. "You need help. Real help." Lucia shook her head. "The police won't come in time. And if they do, they'll take the children to state homes. They'll be split up. Some will run away again. They won't be safe there." Keanu stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Then we hold them off long enough to move everyone somewhere safer." Lucia's eyes met his, filled with gratitude and fear. "You don't have to stay." "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Outside, the sound of voices grew louder, angry, impatient. A beam of light swept across the boarded windows, cutting through the darkness. The children buried in the crawl space held each other, trying not to breathe. Lucia whispered a prayer under her breath. "Dios mío, protégelos." Keanu positioned himself near the front door, picking up a rusted metal pipe from the floor. His heartbeat slowed, focus sharpening. For years, he'd fought choreographed villains under stage lights. But tonight, there was no script. A man's voice shouted from outside. "Lucia, we know you're in there!" The door shook violently as someone kicked it. Lucia turned to Keanu, her voice trembling. "If they break through, they won't," he said, gripping the pipe tighter. "Not while I'm here." The banging on the door came again, harder this time, followed by the crash of something metallic being thrown against it. Lucia flinched, but didn't run. Her body was taut with fear, yet her eyes burned with determination. She knew what was at stake. If the traffickers broke through, the children wouldn't just be taken, they would disappear, erased from the world. "Lucia," Keanu said steadily, moving closer. "How many are out there?" She shook her head, voice trembling. "At least 4, maybe 5. They never come alone." "Do they have weapons?" "Yes," she whispered. "Always." The pounding grew louder, the wood beginning to splinter. The older children worked quickly, loading food and blankets into worn backpacks, helping the smaller ones crawl deeper into the hidden crawl space beneath the floor. Their fear was visible, but they moved with the precision of kids who'd practiced this many times before. Lucia's hands were shaking as she handed one last bottle of water to a teenage girl. "Stay quiet. No matter what happens, don't come out until you hear my voice." Keanu pulled his phone from his pocket. "I'm calling for help," he said, already scrolling through his contacts. Lucia turned, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, please. You can't involve anyone. If the police come, they'll ask questions. And if the wrong people hear, he interrupted gently but firmly. "Lucia, this isn't about questions anymore. These people are dangerous. You can't fight them alone." He pressed the call button, his voice calm but commanding. "It's Keanu. I need a team now abandoned elementary school on the east side, near Soto Street. Bring the SUVs. Quiet approach, no sirens. It's not a film set, it's real." The man on the other end hesitated, then said, "Understood. 5 minutes." Keanu ended the call and looked back at Lucia. "They'll be here soon." She stared at him as if trying to comprehend the reality of what he'd just done. "You followed me," she said, her tone soft but shaken. "You saw everything." "I couldn't ignore it," he replied. "You've been risking your life for these children. That ends tonight." The wood of the front door cracked under another heavy hit. A voice shouted from outside in Spanish. "You think you can hide from us forever? We own this city." Lucia's breath hitched, but Keanu's expression didn't change. He stepped in front of the door, pipe in hand, his silhouette framed by the faint light from the candles. He wasn't thinking about fame, cameras, or reputation, only about the terrified faces hiding behind that wall. "Get them ready to move," he said. "If they break through, I'll hold them off until my team arrives." Lucia shook her head fiercely. "You can't. They'll kill you." Keanu's voice was calm. "They've met men before. They haven't met me." Outside, footsteps crunched closer through the gravel, and the voices multiplied. The night was closing in. Lucia's pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to grab Keanu, to drag him toward the back exit, but there was no time. The sound of the traffickers outside grew louder, doors slamming, gravel crunching under heavy boots, harsh voices barking orders. They were surrounding the building. Keanu stepped closer to the entrance, motioning for Lucia to stay behind him. "Keep the children quiet," he said softly. "Lock the back door. If something happens, take them through the fence behind the playground." Lucia's eyes filled with fear. "You don't understand these men. They won't hesitate. Neither will I." The pounding on the front door stopped. For a brief moment, the silence was worse than the noise. Then came a voice, deep, mocking, familiar. "Lucia," the scarred man called out, "you made a big mistake, bringing someone else into this." Keanu's grip on the metal pipe tightened. He recognized that voice. Instantly, the man continued, his words echoing through the broken windows. "You think your little movie star can save you? I know who he is. The whole world knows who he is. He won't risk his face for you." Lucia froze. She looked at Keanu, her lips parting in shock. "They know you," she whispered. He nodded slightly. "Let them." Outside, the men laughed. "Come on out, Mr. Reeves. Maybe you can buy these kids back. You like playing hero, right?" Keanu didn't move. He stood tall, the flickering candlelight glinting off his calm, focused expression. "Lucia," he murmured, "when I open this door, get the kids moving." She grabbed his arm, desperate. "No, please, don't open it." "I have to," he said gently. "If they get inside, the children won't have a chance." Another crash shook the frame. The door splintered near the hinges. The first board gave way. Keanu took a deep breath and stepped forward, his heartbeat steady despite the chaos building outside. He swung the door open just enough to be seen. 3 men stood in the yard, 2 holding bats, one with a knife glinting in the moonlight. Their faces were hard, cruel, the kind that had seen too many frightened victims. "Leave," Keanu said evenly. "Now." The scarred man smirked. "You really are him." He gestured toward the building. "You don't want to do this. Walk away, Reeves. We're not after you. We just want what's ours." "They're not yours," Keanu replied. "They're children." The man's smile disappeared. "Last warning." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "Here's mine." The first man lunged. Keanu sidestepped, swinging the pipe in one clean arc. It hit the attacker's arm, sending the bat flying. The second man charged from the left, knife raised, but Keanu caught his wrist, twisting hard until the blade dropped. The third man backed up, shocked by the precision and speed. Inside, Lucia clutched her cross, whispering prayers. The children huddled silently beneath the floorboards as the sounds of the struggle echoed through the night. Keanu fought with the control of a man who'd trained his body for decades, not for fame now, but for survival. The fight spilled into the courtyard, where moonlight glinted off broken glass and rusted playground swings. Keanu dodged a wild swing from one of the traffickers, the motion fluid and deliberate. Years of stunt training had honed his reflexes. But this wasn't choreography, this was instinct. He ducked low, swept the man's legs out from under him, and sent him crashing to the ground. The sound of the impact echoed through the night. The scarred leader snarled, "You're outnumbered, Reeves. Walk away, or we'll bury you here." Keanu straightened, his breathing steady. "Then start digging." The man lunged with a blade. Keanu sidestepped again, disarming him in one swift motion, sending the knife clattering into the dirt. The other 2 regrouped, circling him, waiting for an opening. Keanu's pipe was dented now, slick with sweat, but his stance didn't falter. Inside, Lucia kept the children hidden, every muscle in her body trembling. She wanted to scream for him to run, to escape, but she knew he wouldn't. Keanu Reeves had chosen to stand between her world and theirs, between fear and safety. The distant sound of engines cut through the chaos. Lucia's heart leapt. Black SUVs, headlights off, moving silently down the street. His team had arrived. Outside, the traffickers noticed too. One of them cursed, stepping back toward the fence. He called for backup! Keanu seized the moment. He threw the pipe aside and charged forward, slamming his shoulder into the scarred man, knocking him flat. The others scrambled toward the van they'd arrived in, shouting at each other to move. Seconds later, the SUV screeched to a halt, forming a barricade across the narrow road. Armed security emerged quickly, moving with tactical precision. Their flashlights cut through the night, beams catching the panicked faces of the fleeing men. "Drop your weapons!" one of the guards shouted. "On the ground!" The traffickers froze, momentarily blinded. Two tried to run, but were caught within seconds. The scarred leader stumbled backward, clutching his arm, and glared at Keanu. "You think this ends tonight?" he spat. "You have no idea what you've started." Keanu's voice was low and unshaken. "You're right. It's just beginning." The guards dragged the men toward the vehicles. Lucia finally stepped outside, her face pale and streaked with tears. The wind tugged at her hair as she approached Keanu. He turned toward her slowly, exhaustion visible in his eyes, but his posture still composed. "You called them," she whispered. "Yes," he said quietly. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Lucia shook her head, emotion breaking through her composure. "You don't understand. These men aren't just criminals. They belong to something bigger. If you get involved, they'll come after you too." Keanu's eyes softened. "Then they'll find out what happens when you threaten the wrong people." Behind him, the guards loaded the captured men into SUVs. The headlights washed over the playground, casting long shadows that looked like ghosts from another life. For the first time in years, Lucia felt something she hadn't dared to believe in: hope. For a brief moment, it seemed like the danger had passed. The captured traffickers were being restrained near the SUVs, and the children inside the school were still safe in their hiding places. But Keanu's instincts told him it wasn't over. Something in the silence between shouts, something in the way Lucia's eyes darted toward the back hallway, made his chest tighten. "Lucia," he said quietly, "how many men were there?" "4," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe 5. Keanu turned toward his head of security, who was giving orders near the vehicles. "We only got 3, he said under his breath. The realization hit Lucia like a lightning bolt. "The back door?" she gasped. "They know there's another way in." Even before she finished speaking, a loud crash echoed from inside the building, the sound of a door being forced open. Lucia's eyes went wide with terror. "The children!" she cried. Keanu sprinted for the hallway without hesitation. His boots pounded against the concrete floor, the flickering light from the broken bulbs guiding his way. Behind him, Lucia followed, clutching the small silver cross at her neck. They reached the cafeteria just as 2 children burst from the storage area, crying. "They're in the back!" one of them shouted. Lucia's face hardened. "Back to the closet," she commanded in Spanish. "All of you, now!" The older ones obeyed immediately, pulling the younger children into the dark storage space and shutting the door behind them. Lucia turned to Keanu, breathless, fear tightening her voice. "They can't see the children. If they do, I'll handle it," he said firmly. "No, please," she begged. "They'll kill you. You don't know what they're capable of." Keanu looked her in the eyes, calm and unshaken. "Then I'll make them believe I'm not worth killing." He moved toward the far end of the cafeteria, where a thin shaft of moonlight shone through a broken window. The sound of footsteps approached from the hallway. Slow, deliberate, confident. Keanu glanced around quickly, assessing the environment the way he did before every action scene. Only this time, there were no cameras, no retakes. There was only one chance. He picked up an old clipboard from a table, grabbed a nearby flashlight, and adjusted his stance to look like a man inspecting the property. Lucia hid behind the shelves, heart pounding. She could see the faint outline of Keanu standing in the core, center of the cafeteria, backlit by the moon. He looked impossibly calm, like a man waiting for a meeting instead of a fight. The footsteps drew closer. Voices muttered in Spanish. The door creaked open, and 2 men stepped inside, their silhouettes filling the doorway. They were armed, one with a bat, the other with a pistol tucked into his waistband. Keanu lifted the clipboard and pretended to jot something down. "Evening," he said evenly. "This building's condemned. You shouldn't be here." The men froze. The taller one squinted at him, disbelief flashing across his face. "Wait," he muttered in English. "Is that him?" Keanu kept his expression calm, even as the men's eyes adjusted to the dim light. The taller one stepped forward, his voice laced with confusion. "You're Keanu Reeves," he said, almost laughing. "What are you doing here?" Keanu glanced down at the clipboard as if the question didn't matter. "Renovation project," he said casually. "City property. Condemned building. You're trespassing." The shorter man frowned, reaching for the pistol tucked in his waistband. "This ain't no renovation site," he growled. "Where's the woman?" Keanu didn't move. "I suggest you leave before the police arrive." The taller man tilted his head, smirking. "You called the cops? That's cute." He took another step forward, circling slowly. "What are you really doing here, movie star? Helping the maid hide her little orphans?" Keanu's hand tightened around the flashlight. His voice stayed calm, measured. "You should walk away." The shorter man chuckled. "And let you play hero? No chance." He raised the pistol slightly, the metal catching a glint of light. "You've got 5 seconds to tell me where she is." Lucia, hidden behind the metal shelving, covered her mouth to keep from gasping. Her knuckles turned white as she clutched the cross around her neck. The children behind her huddled, together in silence, too scared to breathe. Keanu's tone dropped lower, the edge unmistakable now. "I said, leave." The taller man laughed, ready to respond. But before a single word left his mouth, the sound of engines thundered from outside. Headlights blazed through the broken windows, flooding the cafeteria with harsh white light. The traffickers froze. Then came the unmistakable click of safeties being released. From the hallway, Keanu's security team advanced with tactical precision, 3 men in dark gear, weapons raised, their voices commanding. "Drop your weapon," one of them shouted. "Hands where we can see them." The shorter man panicked and swung his pistol toward the light, but before he could fire, a sharp crack echoed through the room. One of the guards fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Dust rained down, and the men stumbled backward, terrified. Keanu stepped forward just as the flashlight beam caught the fear in their faces. "It's over," he said quietly. "Don't make this worse." The taller one dropped his bat, his voice shaking. "You don't understand who we work for." "Neither do you," Keanu replied. "But you're about to find out." The men were forced to the ground. The guards moved in swiftly, zip-tying their wrists and confiscating the pistol. The tension that had filled the air for what felt like hours began to lift. Lucia finally emerged from her hiding place, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked at Keanu standing in the center of the light, surrounded by his team, breathing hard but still steady. "You saved them," she whispered, her voice breaking. Keanu turned toward her slowly, his eyes soft but resolute. "No," he said quietly. "You did." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The security chief turned to Keanu. "Law enforcement's inbound. What do you want us to tell them?" Keanu's answer came without hesitation. "Tell them the truth. These children need protection." Lucia stepped into the open, her knees weak as the sound of the sirens grew louder. The light from the SUVs painted the cafeteria in sharp contrasts, chaos and salvation all at once. The children slowly emerged from their hiding place, eyes wide and uncertain, clutching each other for reassurance. Keanu turned to them, his voice calm but full of quiet command. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." The youngest, a girl no older than 5, stared up at him. "Are they gone?" she whispered. Keanu knelt, meeting her frightened eyes. "They won't hurt you again." Her small hand reached out, touching his sleeve as if to make sure he was real. Lucia's heart swelled at the sight. For years, she had carried this burden alone, feeding, hiding, protecting, and now someone else was standing in the fire beside her, someone powerful enough to make the darkness retreat. The security team began sweeping the rest of the building, ensuring no more danger remained. Broken boards creaked. Wind howled faintly through shattered windows, and for the first time, the sound didn't feel threatening. It felt cleansing, like the night itself was exhaling. Lucia walked closer, stopping a few feet from Keanu. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "You shouldn't have done this," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Now they'll come after you too." He stood slowly, brushing dust from his coat. "Let them try," he said, "but they won't get near these children again." Lucia shook her head, disbelief and gratitude mixing in her expression. "Why would you risk everything for us? You could have walked away." Keanu's gaze softened. "Because I saw what you do. And once you've seen something like that, something real, you can't pretend you didn't." She blinked, emotion tightening her voice. "Most people would have called the police and gone back to their comfortable lives." He gave a faint smile. "Most people aren't you." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder until red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Police cars stopped near the SUVs, and officers stepped out cautiously, scanning the scene. The security chief walked out to meet them, explaining what had happened. Lucia turned toward the children, gathering them together, whispering reassurances in Spanish. Keanu watched her, the candlelight flickering across her face. There was exhaustion there, but also strength, the kind born of years of fighting battles no one else saw. One of the officers approached, recognizing Keanu instantly. "Mr. Reeves?" he asked, incredulous. "You called this in?" Keanu nodded. "They were trying to take the kids." The officer looked around, eyes landing on the terrified group of children. His expression softened. "We'll get them to safety." "You did the right thing." Keanu didn't answer. His eyes stayed on Lucia, who was kneeling among the children, holding their hands, whispering soft words of comfort. For the first time in a long while, he understood what purpose really looked like. As the officers led the captured men into patrol cars, Keanu stepped outside, the cold air biting against his skin. The night sky stretched endless and heavy above him. His life had changed the moment he decided to follow Lucia into the dark. There was no going back now, and he didn't want to. The convoy of SUVs rolled quietly through the sleeping streets of East Los Angeles. The red and blue lights had faded behind them, and the chaos of the abandoned school now existed only as echoes in their minds. Keanu sat behind the wheel of his black SUV, knuckles white around the steering wheel. Beside him, Lucia sat in silence, clutching a sleeping child to her chest. The others were in the vehicle behind them, escorted by two members of his security team. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. The hum of the engine filled the space between them, heavy and cold. Keanu finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "You're going to have to tell me everything." Lucia didn't answer. Her eyes stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of orange and white. She looked exhausted, older somehow, her strength dimmed by the weight of what she carried. "Lucia," he said again, softer this time. "If I'm going to help you, I need to understand what's happening." Her fingers tightened around the child's small hand. "They weren't supposed to find us again." "Who?" "The traffickers." The word seemed to hurt as it left her lips. "The men you fought tonight. They take children, sell them. Some for labor, some for worse." Keanu's grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles turned pale. He said nothing, afraid that if he spoke, his anger would spill out, uncontrolled. Lucia took a shaky breath. "These children, every one of them escaped. Some from Mexico, others from here. The police couldn't protect them. The shelters were full. Some didn't believe their stories, so I did what I could." She brushed a tear from her cheek quickly, as if ashamed to show weakness. "I found abandoned buildings, old churches, schools, anywhere safe for a night. I fed them with what I earned, cleaning houses. When I worked for you, I used most of my paycheck to buy food, medicine, blankets." Keanu's eyes flicked toward her. "All this time, he murmured. 3 years you've worked for me, and I never knew. She smiled faintly, sadness mixed with pride. I didn't want you to. It wasn't your burden. He shook his head. It should have been someone's. No one person should carry that alone. Lucia's hand trembled as she adjusted the child's blanket. I couldn't stop after the first one. His name was Gabriel. I found him behind a gas station, hiding from the men who took him. I tried to bring him to the police, but they wouldn't take him without proof, so I kept him. And then, more came. Word spread among the kids. They called me Senora Luz, the Lady of Light. I never wanted that name. I just wanted them safe. Keanu's throat tightened. He couldn't look at her because if he did, she'd see the tears gathering in his eyes. The city lights thinned as they drove toward the quieter outskirts. The hum of the tires on the pavement blended with Lucia's quiet, steady breathing. Keanu wanted to speak, to comfort her somehow, but he sensed she wasn't finished. Lucia's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, though her voice softened. It started after my daughter was taken, she said. Keanu turned slightly toward her, his expression tightening. Your daughter? Her hands gripped the fabric of her skirt. Her name was Elena. She was 8. Sweet, shy, always drawing flowers. One night, we were walking home from the market in our village in Mexico. A van stopped beside us. 2 men got out. Before I could scream, they grabbed her. I tried to fight, but her voice broke. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. They pushed me down. When I got up, the van was gone. Keanu's chest constricted. Did you find them? I went to the police. They took a report, but nothing happened. Weeks turned to months. I searched everywhere. Cities, shelters, hospitals. I sold everything I owned to keep looking. She wiped her eyes quickly. After a year, they told me to stop. They said she was probably dead, but I couldn't stop. I came here, thinking maybe she'd been brought across the border. Her voice cracked again, but she kept going. Instead of finding her, I found others. Children living in abandoned houses, in alleys, hiding from the same kind of men who took my Elena. Some had numbers tattooed on their wrists. Others didn't even remember their last names. Keanu stared at the road ahead, his vision blurring. Every word felt like a blow to the soul. And you've been saving them ever since, he murmured. Lucia nodded weakly. At first, it was 1 or 2. Then it became 5, then 10. I thought maybe if I helped enough of them, God would lead me to her. But he never did. So I made peace with it. If I couldn't save my child, I would save someone else's. Keanu's grip on the wheel loosened, his knuckles aching. He took a deep breath, steady but waited. Lucia, he said quietly, you've done more for this world than most people with power ever will. She shook her head. No, I just couldn't turn away. Once you've seen a child disappear, you can't look at another hungry face and pretend it's not your problem. The sincerity in her words broke something open in him. He had spent years using his fame and money for causes he believed in: hospitals, scholarships, charities, but nothing compared to the raw courage of the woman sitting beside him. Lucia leaned her head back against the seat, tears silently tracing down her cheeks. Sometimes I still dream about Elena, she whispered. In the dream, she's still 8, still calling for me. I wake up, and for a moment, I think I hear her voice in the hallway, but it's always just the wind. Keanu didn't speak. The words weren't enough for what she'd endured. He reached over, gently placing his hand over hers. Lucia didn't pull her hand away. Her fingers trembled beneath his, worn from years of scrubbing floors and holding frightened children. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet hum of the road filled the space between them like a fragile truce between pain and peace. Finally, Keanu said softly, Lucia, you don't have to do this alone anymore. Her eyes flicked toward him, uncertain. What do you mean? I mean I can help, he said, his tone steady. These children need more than food and blankets. They need protection, a place to belong. You've been doing the work of an entire system by yourself. That ends tonight. Lucia shook her head. a faint panic in her voice. "No, please, Mr. Reeves. If people find out what you've done tonight, it will bring attention we can't afford. The wrong people will see. They'll come back." He met her gaze, unwavering. "Then we'll make sure they can't." She turned away, tears pooling in her eyes again. "You don't understand. You're famous. You can't just disappear into the shadows like I can. They'll follow you. They'll threaten your life. They'll threaten your career." Keanu's voice deepened, resolute. "Lucia, I've spent my whole life pretending to be heroes on a screen. Tonight, I met a real one. You've been fighting this war without armor, without help, and without recognition. That changes now." Her breath caught. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" He paused, his eyes soft, but filled with conviction. "Because I've seen too much to walk away. Because you reminded me that goodness isn't meant to be quiet." Lucia stared at him, unsure whether to cry or smile. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." The SUV turned down a narrow road leading to a small church Lucia had used as a temporary refuge before. Its worn cross glowed faintly under a single street lamp. The other vehicles followed closely behind, carrying the children who had fallen asleep in safety for the first time in months. Keanu parked and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither moved. Then Lucia spoke, her voice barely audible. "You're different from the man I thought you were." Keanu glanced at her, half smiling. "Most people think they know me. They only see what's on screen." She nodded slowly. "I think God sent you tonight." He didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he opened his door, stepping out into the cool air, and walked around to open hers. The smell of damp earth filled the night as she carefully lifted the sleeping child from her lap. As they walked toward the church, Lucia looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. "If my Elena is still alive somewhere," she said quietly, "I hope someone is protecting her the way you helped protect these children." Keanu looked at her, his voice low and steady. "If she is," he said, "I promise you I'll find her." For the first time in years, Lucia let herself believe that might be true. The sun was rising over the hills when Keanu's convoy reached the edge of his secluded ranch. The property sat hidden behind tall pines and winding dirt roads, miles from the city's noise. Birds stirred in the early light, and mist curled across the grass like a blanket. To anyone else, it was just a peaceful retreat, but to Lucia and the children, it looked like a miracle. Keanu parked near the main house and stepped out first. The children stared through the SUV windows, wide-eyed and hesitant. They had seen too many places that promised safety only to be chased away again. Lucia turned toward them, her voice gentle. "It's all right, mis amores. You can come out." One by one, the doors opened. The children stepped onto the gravel driveway, their shoes crunching softly. Some clung to each other. Others held Lucia's hands. Keanu watched. As the morning light touched their faces, faces that had learned fear too young and trust too late. From the porch, a man in his 40s approached, broad-shouldered with kind eyes and a cautious smile. Marcus Lynn, Keanu's longtime friend and head of security, had already been alerted. "You weren't kidding," he said quietly, glancing at the group of children behind him. "You really did bring half an orphanage." Keanu's reply was calm, more like survivors. Marcus studied the faces, his usual humor gone. "I'll keep the perimeter locked down. No one gets in or out without clearance." Lucia stepped forward timidly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, sir." Marcus shook his head. "No need for that, ma'am. You're safe here. That's what matters." Within an hour, the ranch was alive with quiet motion. Marcus's team secured the gates and swept the surrounding woods for any signs of intrusion. Inside, Keanu guided the children into the guest rooms, where warm beds and blankets waited. Lucia helped them settle, tucking each one in as if they were her own. Keanu moved through the house, organizing whatever he could: food, clothes, first aid kits. He had always kept the place simple, almost empty, but now it felt like it had found a purpose. the kitchen filled with the smell of oatmeal and tea. The sound of small voices drifted through the hallways, soft and cautious, like the beginning of a song that had long been forgotten. When one of the younger boys started crying for his mother, Lucia knelt beside him, whispering words of comfort. Keanu watched from the doorway, his throat tightening. She didn't have to ask what he was thinking. The same thought had crossed both their minds: how many mothers were still searching, praying their children might have found someone like her. As the morning wore on, the children began to relax. They ate slowly, unsure if this meal would be their last in safety. Keanu stayed near them, refilling bowls, listening to their laughter, return little by little. Each small smile felt like a victory. When Lucia caught his gaze from across the table, she mouthed a single word: "Gracias." Keanu nodded quietly. "No," he whispered to himself. "Thank you." The children napped in the guest rooms, wrapped in soft blankets, their small chests rising and falling with the rhythm of safety. The quiet felt almost sacred. For the first time in weeks, no one was running, no one was hiding. Lucia stood on the porch, staring out toward the hills. Her hands were clasped together, trembling slightly. Marcus joined her, handing her a mug of warm tea. "You should try to rest," he said gently. "I can't," Lucia murmured. "When it gets quiet like this, I remember the others, the ones I couldn't save." Marcus didn't push further. He had seen enough in his line of work to understand that silence could be louder than screams. He nodded toward Keanu, who was sitting alone near the barn, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "He hasn't slept either." Lucia followed his gaze. Keanu looked distant, lost in thought. The morning sunlight, long replaced by a soft, golden dusk. "He doesn't have to do this," she whispered. Marcus gave a small smile. "That's exactly why he's doing it." Inside, Keanu had prepared everything he could. The children's clothes were being laundered. His doctor friend, Dr. Holloway, had agreed to come quietly at dawn to check on everyone. He had called in favors from people he trusted, those who wouldn't ask questions but knew how to keep secrets. Still, he felt an ache he couldn't shake, a sense that it wasn't enough. He walked back inside, his footsteps light, so as not to wake anyone. The house smelled faintly of lavender and soap now. Lucia sat on the couch near the fireplace, her eyes half closed, exhaustion tugging at her. "Everything's secure," Keanu said softly. "Marcus has men watching every exit road. You can rest." She nodded but didn't move. "I've lived too long, waiting for footsteps in the dark. My body doesn't know how to rest anymore." Keanu sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "You gave them hope," he said quietly. "That's not something the world forgets easily." Lucia's lips trembled. "Hope doesn't stop monsters like them." He looked toward the window, where the sun was melting into the trees. "No," he said, "but it gives us the strength to fight them." Lucia turned her eyes toward him. "You really mean to help, don't you?" "I already am," he said simply. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly. Lucia's head tilted to the side, sleep finally claiming her. Keanu stood, covering her with a blanket. He walked into the living room, where only the glow of the dying fire lit the walls. The weight of what he'd seen pressed against him. The faces of frightened children, Lucia's trembling confession, the cruelty of the men who hunted them. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a new message to Marcus. His thumbs hovered over the screen for only a second before typing 2 words that carried the promise of a new beginning. "We start tomorrow." Morning light poured through the tall windows of Keanu's study, illuminating stacks of folders, legal papers, and news reports scattered across his desk. Days had passed since Lucia and the children had arrived at the ranch, but rest had become a distant memory. Every night he stayed up reading reports, transcripts, and case files from across the country, records of missing children, trafficking rings, and cases that had quietly disappeared. Marcus entered the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one beside the keyboard. "You haven't stopped in 72 hours, he said quietly. Keanu didn't look up. "Neither have they," he said. gesturing toward the photos on the table, faces of missing children printed from old databases. Marcus sighed. I know what you're thinking, but this isn't a movie. You can't fix all of it. Keanu finally looked up, his eyes shadowed but burning with determination. Then, I'll fix what I can. Within days, he began making calls first to his legal team, then to journalists he trusted, and finally to contacts within federal law enforcement. Most were shocked, some hesitant, but all listened. His name carried weight, and he used it like a weapon, demanding answers, accountability, and action. Lucia watched from the kitchen doorway as Keanu paced the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his tone measured but firm. I'm not asking for permission, he said during one call. I'm offering resources, private funding, logistics, security. You want to stop this? Then let's stop it. She had never seen anyone fight for her cause with such conviction. For years, she had begged for help from officials who only gave her sympathetic smiles and empty promises. Now, this man who could have stayed silent was bringing the darkness into the light. 2 days later, Keanu sat in a private meeting at his lawyer's office. Around the polished oak table sat his attorney, a pair of federal investigators, and a journalist named Daniel Briggs, a man known for uncovering systemic corruption. The air was thick with tension. Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm but unyielding. We expose it all, he said. Names, routes, operations, every city, every network. I'll pay for whatever resources you need. Briggs nodded, scribbling notes. Once this goes public, it'll be chaos. You'll be accused of interfering. They'll say you crossed lines. Keanu met his gaze without blinking. If crossing a line saves a child, then it's worth it. One of the investigators shifted uneasily. You're putting a target on your back, Mr. Reeves. These people don't forgive interference. Keanu's response was steady. They'll have to find me first. When he returned to the ranch that night, Lucia was waiting on the porch, holding a folded blanket in her hands. She had overheard enough of the conversations to know the risks he was taking. You're risking everything, she said softly. Keanu looked at her, tired but resolute. So are you. She lowered her gaze, whispering, I just wanted them safe. He nodded, and now they will be. The storm broke 3 days later. News anchors interrupted regular programming with headlines that spread across every network. Actor Keanu Reeves funds secret operation against trafficking rings. The story exploded. Photos of Lucia's children blurred on screen beside old images of Keanu, twisted into sensational headlines. Some called him a hero, others called him reckless. Within hours, hashtags filled social media: number Keanu Rescue, number Justice for the Children, number Unlawful Interference. Marcus stormed into the study, holding his phone. It's everywhere, he said grimly. They leaked it. Keanu looked up from his laptop, where news articles flashed like wildfire. Then it's too late to stop it, he said quietly. Lucia entered moments later, clutching a newspaper she hadn't been ready to see. The front page showed a photo of her carrying one of the rescued children, her face partially visible. They know who I am, she whispered. They'll come for me again. Keanu rose and placed a hand on her shoulder. They won't touch you. Marcus has increased security. You're safe here. Her eyes shimmered with fear and gratitude. Safe for now, she said softly. But the world doesn't like when people tell the truth. By evening, Keanu's legal team arrived at the ranch. They carried thick folders and expressions of exhaustion. The lead attorney, Dana Walsh, didn't waste time. You're being accused of vigilantism, she said. 2 agencies claim you interfered with active investigations. One company that owns private detention centers is threatening a lawsuit for defamation, Marcus muttered. Unbelievable. Keanu leaned back in his chair, calm despite the storm around him. Let them come, he said. If they want to make this about me, fine. But it won't stop what's already begun. Dana rubbed her temples. You're making enemies in places you don't even know exist. Powerful people are losing money and control because of what you've started. Keanu met her eyes. Then we're finally doing something right. The following morning, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters camped outside his Los Angeles home. Talk shows debated his motives, calling him everything from a saint to a self-righteous celebrity. Through it all, Keanu refused to respond publicly. Instead, he focused on the one thing that mattered: amplifying Lucia's story. With her consent, Daniel Briggs released an article that changed everything. It detailed Lucia's years of risking her life to protect trafficked children, the night Keanu found her, and the truth about the system that had failed them all. The story included testimonies from survivors, now safe, now brave enough to speak. Within 24 hours, donations poured in to charities aiding missing children. Protesters gathered outside government buildings demanding reform. For the first time in years, Lucia watched the news not with dread, but with tears of hope. "They're listening," she whispered. Keanu stood beside her, his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen. "It's not enough yet," he said quietly. "Not until the people who let this happen are held accountable." Marcus entered then, his tone solemn. "The lawsuit was filed this morning. They're coming for your assets, your reputation, everything." Keanu didn't hesitate. "I don't care what it costs," he said. "Those kids deserve better." The sky over the ranch was still dark when Keanu's phone began to buzz. It was 5:02 a.m. Marcus was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee. He looked up as Keanu entered, still half-dressed in yesterday's clothes. "It's happening," Marcus said quietly, sliding a tablet across the table. On the screen, a live feed flickered to life, grainy surveillance footage from a secure line. The timestamp read 4:59. Agents in dark vests moved silently through the desert outside Phoenix, surrounding a compound that looked more like a junkyard than a home. Lucia entered moments later, her hands shaking as she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. "Is this?" she asked, unable to finish the sentence. Keanu nodded. "The first raid." They stood side by side as the operation unfolded in tense silence. The agents moved in, weapons raised but restrained, using hand signals and muffled commands. A door splintered open. Seconds later, the first figures emerged, small, terrified children wrapped in blankets, led by agents who guided them to safety. Lucia gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Tears filled her eyes. "Dios mío," she whispered. "Those are real places. That's one of the names I gave them." Marcus zoomed the feed closer. "They got them out. Safe." Keanu stared at the screen, his jaw tight. For days, he'd been on constant calls with investigators, pushing for every lead Lucia and her network had given him. Dozens of hidden locations, coded warehouses, and safe houses had been listed in her handwritten notes. Now, those notes were changing lives. The second feed came online from a city in Texas. This one was inside an abandoned motel. Agents kicked through rusted doors and moved down the narrow hallway. Then came a shout, a child's cry. 2 boys were pulled from a locked bathroom, clinging to each other. A female agent crouched down, whispering softly to calm them. Lucia sobbed openly now, her body trembling. Keanu put a hand on her shoulder. "You did this," he said quietly. "You made this happen." She shook her head. "No, you did. Without you, no one would have listened." He didn't answer. The truth was, he didn't care about the credit. What mattered were the faces on that screen, children blinking into the dawn after being trapped in darkness. By 7 o'clock, feeds from 4 states were streaming: Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and Nevada. Each one showed a different piece of the operation, a coordinated strike against one of the largest trafficking networks ever uncovered in the region. Marcus updated him in real time. "Reports say 22 confirmed rescues so far," he said. "They're still counting." Lucia pressed her hands together and whispered a quiet prayer. Keanu stood beside her, feeling a strange mix of relief and fury. Relief for the lives being saved. Fury for how long it had gone unnoticed. As the sun broke over the hills, one final feed loaded, this time from Los Angeles. The place was only 30 minutes from where they stood. The Los Angeles feed opened with flashing lights, bouncing off warehouse walls. Police cars lined the street, while FBI agents in tactical gear advanced through a rusted gate. A news helicopter hovered above, capturing everything. The world was watching now. Lucia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "That place," she whispered. "That's one of their main hubs. I remember it. I remember those walls." Keanu's heart pounded as he watched the door burst open. Inside, agents shouted commands, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Moments later, a line of children was let out, one by one, barefoot, frightened, and blinking at the daylight. Marcus exhaled. "That makes 29, he said. 29, rescued in total." Lucia covered her face and wept. The relief that poured out of her was mixed with something deeper: exhaustion, sorrow, and gratitude, all at once. "They're free," she murmured through tears. "After all these years, they're finally free." Keanu rested a hand on her shoulder. "Because you never gave up." Her tears fell harder at that. She shook her head. "No, because you listened." On the feed, an FBI commander stepped before the cameras, giving the first official statement. "Thanks to a combined operation and critical leads provided by private sources," she said, "we've dismantled a major trafficking network spanning 4 states. Dozens of children have been rescued, and multiple suspects are in custody." The reporter's voice echoed faintly from the broadcast. Sources confirmed the anonymous benefactor funding the operation is actor Keanu Reeves. Lucia looked at him, startled. "They told him it was you?" He nodded slowly. "They had to. It was going to come out anyway." Her eyes filled again. "They'll hate you for this. Those men, the people behind them, they'll want revenge." Keanu's voice was calm but steady. "Then they can come for me, but they won't touch these kids again." Across the table, Marcus frowned at the tablet, scrolling through incoming updates. More arrests coming in from Phoenix and Dallas, several high-profile names. One's a local politician. He hesitated. "It's bigger than we thought, Keanu. Much bigger." Keanu leaned back, processing the scale of what they had just triggered. This wasn't just a crime ring. It was a web of corruption, power, and silence stretching across cities and institutions. The television in the corner switched automatically to breaking news. A new headline appeared in bold red. "Keanu Reeves helps FBI expose human trafficking network." Lucia looked up at the screen, tears still wet on her cheeks. "They're calling you a hero," she said softly. He shook his head. "Heroes don't exist. Just people who finally decide to do something." But as she turned back to the screen, something inside her twisted, a quiet ache that no amount of justice could soothe. Lucia reached for the list she had kept for years, the one filled with names, dates, and photos of missing children. She ran her finger down the faded paper until it stopped at one name, Elena Alvarez. She whispered it under her breath. Keanu noticed her silence. "What is it?" Lucia's voice broke. "They found 29 children today, but not her." 7 days had passed since the raids. The world was still echoing with the shock. News outlets called it one of the most significant anti-trafficking operations in modern history. Donations flooded into the new foundation Keanu had quietly formed under Lucia's name. But behind the headlines, there was still an unspoken emptiness. Lucia hadn't slept a full night since the rescue. Every morning she woke before sunrise, praying by the window of the ranch house. She'd watch the children play in the yard, their laughter soft against the wind, and whisper the same words, "Please, God, just let me find her." Keanu gave her space, but kept watch. He'd seen people haunted by loss before, but Lucia's pain had a stillness to it. A quiet, unrelenting ache that refused to fade. Each night, she studied the list of recovered names, hoping for a miracle. Each night, she folded the paper and cried herself to sleep. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. Marcus answered, his usual calm replaced by alertness. "Keanu, you'll want to take this," he said, handing over the phone. Keanu pressed it to his ear. "Reeves." A woman's voice responded, steady, but urgent. "Mr. Reeves, this is Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Human Trafficking Division. I have information you'll want to hear about the Alvarez case." Keanu's pulse quickened. "I'm listening." Sarah hesitated before continuing. "We've been combing through digital records seized during the raids. One database contains over 600 names of confirmed and suspected victims. Among them, we found an entry. Elena Alvarez, born Monterrey, Mexico, abducted at age 12. Keanu stood frozen, his mind barely registering the words. "Elena," he repeated softly. Lucia, hearing the name from across the room, turned sharply. Her face drained of color. "My daughter?" Keanu nodded, still gripping the phone. "She's on the list, Lucia." Sarah's voice broke through again. "The file lists her as having been sold 6 years ago to a family in Montana. The transaction matches a trafficking route tied to one of the ringleaders you helped expose. The record shows she was listed as domestic help." Lucia clutched the edge of the table, her breathing ragged. "Alive?" she gasped. "Is she alive?" Sarah's tone softened. "We don't know yet. The document doesn't confirm her current location, only the family name Henderson. We're coordinating with Montana authorities to verify." Lucia covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably. Keanu placed a hand on her back as she shook beneath the weight of years of grief. "We'll find her," he said quietly. "You hear me? We'll find her." He lifted the phone again. "Agent Chen, send me the address. I'll arrange the transport myself." "Mr. Reeves," Sarah cautioned, "we're still verifying the data." "You should wait until—" "No," Keanu interrupted, his voice low but firm. "She's waited 8 years. That's long enough." When the call ended, Lucia collapsed into a chair, weeping into her hands. Keanu crouched beside her, steadying her shoulders. "Pack what you need," he said softly. "We're going to Montana." Within an hour, the quiet ranch turned into a scene of purposeful motion. Marcus coordinated logistics while Keanu contacted his pilot. A small jet was fueled and ready by the time the sun began to sink behind the California hills. Lucia, still trembling, carried a single bag clutched to her chest, the same canvas one she'd used the night Keanu followed her. It now held only a worn photograph of Elena, a rosary, and a folded letter she'd written years ago but never sent. As they drove to the private airfield, the hum of the engine was the only sound. Lucia stared out the window, her fingers moving rhythmically over the rosary beads. Keanu glanced at her from time to time but said nothing. He knew that sometimes words did more harm than silence. At the airstrip, the plane waited under floodlights. The pilot gave a brief nod, understanding this was no ordinary trip. Marcus spoke quietly with him before turning to Keanu. "We'll be over Montana in 2.5 hours. Weather's clear. I've already contacted a local security team to stay on standby once we land." Lucia's voice was barely a whisper. "You think she's really there?" Keanu looked at her. "I don't think," he said gently. "I believe." They boarded without another word. The cabin lights dimmed, casting soft shadows across their faces. As the engines roared to life, Lucia closed her eyes and began to pray softly in Spanish. Each word was fragile but full of faith, the kind of prayer that comes only from a heart that's already known loss and still dares to hope. Keanu watched her from across the aisle. Every now and then she'd open her eyes to the small photo in her hands, a 12-year-old girl with dark hair and bright eyes, smiling shyly into the camera. "She loved sunflowers," Lucia murmured. "Used to pick them on the walk home from school. Said they looked like the sun was smiling." Keanu's throat tightened. "Then, when we find her," he said, "we'll bring her sunflowers." Lucia gave a small, tearful smile. "You really think she'll remember me?" "She will," he said, "because love doesn't fade, not even after 8 years." The plane climbed higher, breaking through a layer of clouds. Below them, the city lights of Los Angeles faded into a quiet darkness. The stars above seemed almost within reach. Lucia leaned back, her voice barely audible. "I used to dream about this," she said, "that someday I'd find her. But I never imagined I'd be on a plane with you, going to bring her home." Keanu turned toward the window. Life has a strange way of leading us where we're needed most. The hum of the engines filled the silence again. Lucia's hands slowly unclenched, her breathing steadier now. She closed her eyes and whispered one last prayer before sleep took her. Keanu remained awake the entire flight, staring at the faint reflection of his face against the glass, thinking not about fame or film sets, but about a mother and her daughter, separated by 8 years of pain, and what it would mean if tomorrow finally brought them back together. The morning air in Billings, Montana was cold enough to sting the skin. Frost clung to the windows of a small roadside diner called Betty's Breakfast Place. Inside, a young woman moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates with quiet precision. Her name tag read Ella Henderson. She looked like any other waitress working the early shift, polite, reserved, distant. But behind her practiced smile was something unspoken, a heaviness that never left her eyes. Outside, parked across the street, Keanu Reeves sat in the back of an unmarked SUV beside Lucia and FBI agent Sarah Chen. The engine idled softly. Lucia's hands trembled as she clutched a faded photograph, a picture of her daughter at 12, smiling beside a field of sunflowers. Her lips moved in prayer, though no words came out. "That's her," Sarah said gently. "She's been working here for 2 years. Locals know her as Ella. Records confirm the Hendersons kept her as domestic help until she escaped at 18. She's been alone ever since." Lucia's breath hitched. "She's alive," she whispered. "She's really alive." Keanu nodded, his voice quiet. "She's right there, Lucia, just a few steps away." But Lucia couldn't move. Tears blurred her vision as she stared through the diner window. She barely recognized the young woman inside. Thinner, older, her hair tied back, her shoulders slumped under invisible weight. But those eyes, even across the distance, Lucia knew them. Her Elena. Sarah placed a comforting hand on Lucia's arm. "Let me go in first," she said softly. "We'll explain who we are. We don't want to frighten her." Lucia nodded, unable to speak. She watched as Sarah crossed the street and entered the diner. Through the frosted glass, they could see her approach the counter. Ella looked startled at first, then wary, when Sarah showed her credentials. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but each second felt like a lifetime to Lucia. Inside, Ella frowned, confused by Sarah's words. "There must be a mistake," she said quietly. "My parents died years ago." Sarah shook her head gently. "No, Ella, your name isn't Henderson. It's Elena Alvarez. You were taken from Monterey when you were 12. Your mother has been looking for you ever since." Ella's face went pale. "No, that can't be true. They told me she was dead. They told me." Her voice cracked. "Why would you lie about something like this?" Sarah reached across the counter. "Because it's the truth. Your mother is outside, right now." For a long moment, Ella didn't move. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp. Her hands shook as she set down the coffee pot. Tears welled in her eyes. "She's outside?" Sarah nodded slowly. "If you're ready, she'd like to see you." Ella's body trembled, her breath catching in short, panicked bursts. I don't know if I can," she whispered. "What if it's not real? What if this is another trick?" Sarah's voice was calm but firm. "It's real, Elena. And if you're ready, you can walk out that door and see her." Outside, Lucia had already stepped out of the car. Her knees were weak, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it. Keanu stood beside her, steady and silent. "She's coming," Sarah called softly through the door. Lucia turned toward the entrance, tears already spilling down her face. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as Elena stepped outside. The morning sun caught the edge of her hair, and for a moment, Lucia forgot how to breathe. Time seemed to stop. 8 years of searching, of hoping and despairing, all collided in a single heartbeat. Elena stood frozen on the sidewalk, her eyes wide and filled with disbelief. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mama?" Lucia's hand flew to her mouth. The sound of that word, spoken after so many years of silence, shattered her completely. She took one trembling step forward, then another, until her legs gave way. She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mihija," she cried through tears. "I never stopped looking. Never." Elena's body shook as if torn between fear and longing. "They told me you were dead," she said, her voice breaking. "They told me you didn't want me." Lucia shook her head fiercely, reaching out with trembling hands. "No, no, mi amor. They lied. Every day, every night, I prayed for you. I searched every city, every whisper of a lead. You were never forgotten." The space between them seemed endless. But then Elena took a small, hesitant step forward. Her lips quivered. "I'm not the same person," she said. "I'm broken, Mama. I don't know who I am anymore." Lucia's tears fell harder. "You're my daughter," she said simply. "Broken or whole, you're mine." And then, as if something inside her finally broke free, Elena collapsed into her mother's arms. Lucia wrapped her tightly, rocking her the way she had when she was small. Both cried openly, their sobs echoing through the quiet street. Keanu stood a few feet away, watching in silence. His vision blurred as he wiped his eyes, overwhelmed by what he was witnessing. He had acted in hundreds of scenes, played fathers, lovers, heroes. But this was different. This was real. This was love that had survived the impossible. Lucia whispered over and over, her words trembling with devotion. "Te amo, mihija. Te amo." Elena clung to her, her body shaking with years of pent-up grief. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. "I used to dream of you, but I stopped because it hurt too much." Lucia pressed her forehead against hers. "You don't have to dream anymore. You're home." For a long while, neither of them moved. The world faded. No cars, no people, no noise. Only a mother and daughter who had found each other again. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah stood nearby, tears glistening in her eyes. "We'll need to take things slowly," she said softly. "There's a lot to process, but she's safe now." Lucia nodded, still holding Elena's hand. "Safe," she repeated quietly, as if testing the word. Keanu stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Lucia, let's take her somewhere calm, somewhere she can rest." Lucia looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, but glowing with something he hadn't seen before. "Peace. Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me my daughter back." Keanu smiled faintly. "You did that yourself. I just helped you find the light." The morning sun spilled through the wide windows of a newly renovated building in downtown Los Angeles. The sign above the entrance read, "Elena's Hope Foundation." Inside, the walls were covered with bright murals, painted by children, bursts of color, sunlight, and life. Laughter echoed from the playroom, where a group of kids were learning to draw, their crayons scratching across the paper in uneven joy. Lucia Alvarez walked through the halls with calm purpose, greeting staff, checking on case files, and making sure every child had what they needed. The transformation was astonishing. Just 6 months earlier, she had been cleaning houses, hiding frightened children in abandoned buildings. Now, she was the director of a foundation that had already rescued more than 80 survivors of human trafficking. Her daughter, Elena, worked beside her every day. She was stronger now, her posture steady, her eyes brighter. The trauma had not vanished, but it no longer defined her. She was taking classes in social work at the University of Southern California, determined to help others like her. That morning, she was kneeling beside a 6-year-old boy who refused to speak. She handed him a small stuffed bear and said softly, "You don't have to talk today. Just keep this with you." He listens. The boy took the toy without a word, but his grip tightened around it. Elena smiled, patient and gentle, and for a fleeting moment, Lucia watched her daughter with awe. She still couldn't believe it, that Elena was here, alive and thriving. Every time she saw her laugh, every time she watched her help another child, it felt like a miracle unfolding again and again. The sound of the front door opening drew her attention. Keanu Reeves stepped in, wearing jeans, a gray jacket, and a simple smile. He carried 2 large paper bags that smelled faintly of tacos and rice bowls. The children spotted him immediately and ran toward him, shouting his name. "Mr. Keanu! Mr. Keanu!" they called, wrapping around his legs like a small, excited crowd. He laughed, kneeling to greet them all. All right, one at a time. I brought lunch. Who's hungry?" A chorus of cheers filled the lobby. Lucia shook her head, smiling. "You know, you don't have to bring food every time you come," she said, crossing her arms in mock disapproval. Keanu shrugged, grinning. "I like seeing them happy. Besides, it gives me an excuse to sneak away from meetings." He handed her one of the bags. "Extra salsa, just the way you like it." Lucia laughed, shaking her head. "You remember everything." His gaze swept the room, landing on Elena, who was now helping a little girl tie her shoelaces. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he added, "You've built something incredible here, Lucia. You should be proud." Lucia's eyes filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." Keanu looked back at her, his expression humble. "Maybe. But I think you saved me too." Lucia looked at him with surprise. "Saved you? How could I have possibly saved you?" Keanu smiled faintly, glancing toward the children. "You reminded me what purpose looks like. For years, I thought I was doing enough making movies, donating, writing checks. But that night, I followed you. I saw what real courage was. You were fighting monsters no one else would face. It made me realize how easy it is to live comfortably while others suffer in silence." Lucia's voice softened. "And yet, you chose not to look away." He nodded. "You showed me what compassion really means. So yeah, you saved me too." They stood quietly for a moment, listening to the laughter of the children echoing through the hall. The sound was healing. It carried a rhythm of life restored, of innocence finding its way back. A staff member approached, handing Lucia a folder of new cases. She glanced over the files and sighed. 3 more children coming from Arizona next week," she said. "The work never ends." Keanu looked around the bright, cheerful rooms and smiled. "That's the best part. It means the world still needs you." Elena walked over then, wiping her hands on her jeans. "We're starting an art therapy program," she announced proudly. "We got a volunteer from UCLA who's teaching the kids to express their feelings through painting." Lucia's face lit up. "That's wonderful, mija. You're doing amazing work." Elena smiled shyly. "I learned from the best." She glanced at Keanu, her eyes full of gratitude. "From both of you." Keanu chuckled. "I'm just the guy who brings tacos." Elena shook her head. "You're more than that. You gave us a chance to start over." Lucia placed an arm around her daughter. "He's family now," she said warmly. Keanu smiled but didn't speak. He didn't need to. He watched them together, mother and daughter, the bond that had once been broken, now stronger than ever. Moments like this made every sacrifice worth it. Later that afternoon, Keanu sat in the playroom, surrounded by a circle of kids. One little boy tugged on his sleeve. "Tell us a story," the boy said. Keanu leaned back in his chair, pretending to think. A story about what?" "About heroes," another child shouted. He nodded slowly. "All right. But this story's a little different. It's not about someone with powers or armor or a cape. It's about a woman who was brave enough to fight for kids no one else would help. She didn't have weapons, but she had love. And that made her stronger than anyone." Lucia stopped in the doorway, listening with tears in her eyes as the children hung on every word. When the story ended, one of the little girls asked, "Is she real?" Keanu smiled. "Very real," he said softly. "She's right here." Lucia wiped her eyes, pretending to busy herself with paperwork. "You tell stories better than any movie," she whispered. Keanu smiled gently. "That's because this one's true." It began with a single headline. "Accused trafficker in Mexico claims Keanu Reeves fabricated entire operation." Within hours, the story spread like wildfire across international media. The man, one of the few high-ranking traffickers who had escaped arrest during the raids, resurfaced on a talk show in Mexico City. Dressed neatly, his tone calm and rehearsed, he painted himself as a victim of a Hollywood stunt. He claimed the entire anti-trafficking operation had been orchestrated by Keanu Reeves for publicity. None of it was real, he said in Spanish, smirking for the cameras. Reeves paid people to play victims. He wanted to look like a savior. Lucia sat frozen in her office at the foundation, staring at the television. Elena stood beside her, trembling with anger. "How can they let him say that?" she demanded. "How can they let that monster lie to the world after what he's done?" Keanu entered moments later, silent at first. He glanced at the screen, saw the man's smug expression, and turned it off. "They always try to rewrite the story," he said softly. "Because if the truth spreads, they lose their power." Elena's voice shook. "But people believe lies. What if they start to doubt what we've built?" Keanu looked at her, calm but determined. "Then we'll remind them of the truth." By that evening, social media was ablaze with conflicting narratives. Some called Keanu a hero. Others accused him of manipulating headlines. Anonymous accounts posted edited videos, twisting his interviews into conspiracies. The same studios that had once praised him now grew cautious. One executive called his manager, warning, "Keanu's name is trending for all the wrong reasons. He should lie low for a while." The next morning, Keanu's agent called directly. "Look, I believe you," he said. "But the studios are nervous. They're talking about delaying your next project. They don't want controversy attached to the brand." Keanu sat in silence, then replied simply, "If they're afraid of controversy, maybe they're not the kind of studios I should be working with." There was a pause. "Keanu, be careful. You're walking a thin line here." "I know," he said quietly. "But I won't step off it." At the foundation, reporters began showing up, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Lucia shielded the children from the chaos, furious that the media had once again turned their pain into a spectacle. Keanu's security team tightened protocols, keeping everyone safe. Late one night, after the last of the news vans left, Lucia sat with Keanu in her office. "They want you to stop," she said softly. "To walk away." He shook his head. "They don't get to decide that. We're not telling a story anymore, Lucia. We're fighting one." Her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "You could have stayed silent. No one would have blamed you." "I've seen what silence costs," Keanu said, "and I won't pay that price again." The next week was a storm. Every news outlet demanded a statement. Talk shows debated his motives. Commentators dissected his silence, calling it guilt. Online, people argued endlessly, some defending him, others tearing him apart. But Keanu didn't flinch. He refused interviews, refused to argue on television. Instead, he reached out to Sarah Chen and asked a single question: "How do we make sure this never happens again?" 2 days later, he stood in a quiet room on Capitol Hill. It wasn't a movie premiere or a press conference. It was a Senate subcommittee hearing on human trafficking reform. Lucia sat in the front row with Elena beside her, both nervous but proud. Cameras lined the walls, ready to broadcast his testimony live. When his name was called, Keanu rose from his seat and approached the cod microphone. The room fell silent. Dressed in a dark suit, his expression calm, he looked less like a celebrity and more like a man who had seen something he could never unsee. 6 months ago, he began, I followed someone I thought I knew, my housekeeper, Lucia Alvarez. I found out she was saving children from traffickers, risking her life every night while the rest of us slept comfortably. What I saw changed me. It should change all of us. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I've seen the faces of kids who lost everything. I've seen the fear that never leaves their eyes. And I've seen the strength of survivors who somehow keep believing in hope. This isn't about politics. It's about human lives. Reporters typed frantically as his voice grew firmer. Some people are saying this is fake, that the rescues were fabricated, that these children don't exist. Tell that to the 83 kids now attending school, safe because Lucia and her team found them. Tell that to the FBI agents who risked their lives to raid those houses. Tell that to the mother who held her daughter again after 8 years. He looked directly into the cameras. This isn't a movie. I don't get to yell cut and go home. I've seen what happens when good people look away. I won't do it again. The room was silent for several seconds. Then, the sound of applause began softly from the back, one senator, then another, until nearly everyone in the chamber was clapping. Lucia pressed her hand to her heart, tears in her eyes. Elena reached over and held it tightly. For the first time since the accusations began, Lucia felt the tide turning again, truth pushing back against lies. After the hearing, Keanu exited into the sunlight, where dozens of reporters waited. Cameras flashed, voices shouted his name, but he ignored the chaos. Instead, he approached a small group of survivors who had come to support him. A small bracelet woven from red thread. "For luck," she said quietly. Keanu smiled. "I think I already have some," he replied. That evening, news networks replayed his testimony in full. The clip of him saying, "I won't do it again," went viral, shared millions of times. Celebrities voiced support, advocacy groups reached out. Donations to Elena's Hope Foundation tripled overnight. Back in Los Angeles, the children at the foundation watched the hearing on television. When Keanu appeared, they cheered. Rosa, the youngest, pointed at the screen and said, "That's our Mr. Keanu." Lucia watched from her office, smiling through tears. "Yes, it is," she whispered. "The man who followed me into the dark and brought light with him." Keanu sat alone later that night in his home, phone buzzing with messages, offers, and headlines. He turned them all off. Then, he looked out the window, remembering the first night he'd followed Lucia through the shadows. That one small act, driven by curiosity, not courage, had changed everything. He whispered to himself, "We keep going." And somewhere out there, in shelters and classrooms across the country, the children he'd helped to save slept safely, unaware that their quiet protector was still awake, planning the next fight. The ballroom of the downtown Los Angeles Civic Center glowed with warm amber light. Strings of white roses and candles lined the stage, their soft fragrance filling the air. It was a night of elegance and purpose, the first annual Elena's Hope Foundation Gala. Every seat was filled. Survivors, donors, politicians, law enforcement officers, and celebrities gathered under one roof, not to celebrate fame or power, but to honor courage and compassion. Lucia Alvarez stood backstage, clutching a small card with trembling hands. Her dark blue dress shimmered under the lights, though her heart raced faster than it had the night she first spoke to the media. A year ago, she had been invisible, a housemaid, cleaning strangers' homes, hiding frightened children in abandoned buildings, whispering prayers into the dark. Tonight, she stood as the founder of a foundation that had rescued over 170 children across the United States and Mexico. Elena adjusted her mother's necklace before the speech. "You look perfect," she said softly. "You don't need the card, just speak from your heart." Lucia smiled, brushing her daughter's cheek. "My heart's the reason I'm shaking." From the audience, Keanu watched quietly. He sat beside Marcus and Sarah Chen, both applauding each introduction as the event began. He wore a simple black suit, his hair slightly longer now, his demeanor humble as ever. Around him, people whispered his name, pointing in admiration. But he didn't care for the attention. This night wasn't about him. When Lucia's name was announced, the applause thundered. She walked slowly onto the stage, her eyes glistening as the crowd rose to their feet. She gripped the podium for support, took a deep breath, and began. "1 year ago," she said, her voice trembling. "No one saw the children I was hiding, or the fear I carried every night. But then, someone did. Someone chose to see me." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. Lucia continued, her voice growing steadier. "I didn't have power or influence. I only had love for my daughter who was taken from me, and love for the children who reminded me of her. I believed if I could save even one, it would mean she hadn't been lost for nothing." She paused, glancing toward Keanu in the audience. "And then one night, a man followed me. I thought my secret was over, but instead of turning away, he joined me. He didn't ask why I was there. He asked how he could help." Keanu lowered his gaze, visibly moved. Lucia smiled faintly. That choice changed everything. It led to this room, these children, this hope. Tonight, we are not here to mourn what was broken, but to celebrate what was rebuilt together. Applause filled the room again, rising like a wave. Lucia's voice cracked as she finished. I stand here because someone chose to see me. And now, I promise to never look away from anyone who still waits to be seen. The applause continued until Lucia raised her hand for quiet. Her eyes shimmered with tears as she took a deep breath. Tonight, she said softly, there's someone I want to thank. Someone whose kindness changed not just my life, but the lives of every child we've saved. She turned toward the crowd, her voice full of emotion. Keanu Reeves, would you please join me on stage? The audience erupted in applause again, many rising to their feet as Keanu stood slowly, visibly reluctant. He glanced at Lucia, shaking his head slightly as if to say he didn't deserve it, but she gestured firmly for him to come forward. He walked to the stage amid a chorus of cheers. Flashbulbs flickered, capturing the quiet humility in his expression. When he reached Lucia, she handed him a small wooden plaque engraved with gold letters. Elena's Hope Foundation Humanitarian Award for Extraordinary Compassion and Courage. Keanu looked down at it, his jaw tightening, his voice low when he finally spoke. I don't deserve this. Lucia smiled through her tears. You do, because you didn't just help me. You helped the world remember what humanity looks like. Keanu hesitated, then stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent again, as if the air itself was waiting. He held the plaque in one hand and looked out at the hundreds of faces before him, survivors, advocates, families, strangers who believed in something bigger than themselves. I've spent a lot of my life pretending to be heroes on screen, he began quietly. But real heroes don't wear costumes or save the world in 2 hours. Real heroes are people like Lucia, people who fight every day with no spotlight, no script, and no promise of reward. He looked toward the children sitting near the front. And heroes are also those who survived, those who refused to let darkness win. You remind all of us what strength truly means. Lucia pressed her hand to her mouth, trying not to cry. Keanu continued, his voice firm but gentle. This award doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person in this room who refused to look away, to the FBI agents who risked their lives, to the counselors who helped these children heal, to the families who opened their homes, and most of all, to the survivors, the real lights in the dark. For a moment, his voice faltered. When I first followed Lucia that night, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew something felt wrong. I found pain, yes, but I also found hope. I found courage. I found a reminder that doing the right thing is never convenient, but always necessary. He paused, the crowd completely still. Then, with quiet conviction, he finished. If this night stands for anything, let it be this: compassion is the greatest power we have. It's what saves us. It's what heals the world. The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Lucia wiped her tears as Keanu stepped back from the podium, humbled and deeply moved. In the front row, Rosa sat beaming in her white dress, clutching her science trophy, and beside her was Carlos, now in his first year of college, wearing a suit that looked just a little too big. They were living proof of what love could build from ruin. Lucia turned toward Keanu, her voice trembling with gratitude. You gave us hope, she said softly. He smiled back. No, Lucia, you gave it to me. The night air over Los Angeles was calm, almost still, as Keanu Reeves stepped into his quiet home. The echoes of applause from the gala still lingered in his ears, but inside these walls, there was only peace. He loosened his tie, walked into his study, and stood by the same large window where, a year and a half ago, everything had begun. He looked out over the sleeping city. The lights stretched endlessly, each one representing a story, some filled with joy, others shadowed by pain. For years, he had believed he understood life, its rhythm, its losses, its beauty. But Lucia had shown him something deeper. She had shown him what it meant to truly see, He remembered that night vividly. Lucia slipping out with her old canvas bag, moving through the dark streets like someone carrying the weight of the world. He had followed her out of concern, not realizing that decision would change the course of his life forever. That single choice to follow instead of ignore had opened a door he could never close. Keanu turned off the lamp beside his desk and let the moonlight fill the room. He thought about Lucia's words on stage earlier that evening. Someone chose to see me. It wasn't about him. Not really. It was about the moment when one human heart chooses to reach for another. The courage to notice. The compassion to act. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. It was a short text. The gala raised enough funds to open 2 new centers in Mexico next year. We did it. Keanu smiled, typing back, "No, Lucia did it. We just helped her fly." He set the phone aside and looked at the award resting on the shelf, a simple wooden plaque engraved with his name. But to him, it wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder, a promise. He picked it up and ran his thumb across the words, Humanitarian Award. It didn't feel like an ending, but a beginning. Because the truth was, the work was never done. There were still children out there waiting to be found, still mothers praying in silence for miracles, still countless Lucias fighting in the shadows without recognition or help. He opened his laptop, writing a short email to Lucia. The words came easily. "We keep going," he wrote, "one more child at a time." Then he hit send, closed the laptop, and stood by the window once more. The city seemed different tonight. Not quieter, not safer, but brighter somehow. Maybe it was only the moon, or maybe it was something else, something like hope. He thought about Elena, her laughter, as she taught art to the children at the foundation. About Rosa and Carlos, sitting proudly at the gala. About Lucia, whose courage had lit a spark that now reached across borders. And for the first time in a long while, Keanu felt something rare and grounding peace mixed with purpose. Outside, a faint breeze carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine through the open window. Keanu leaned against the frame, staring up at the stars scattered over the skyline. He wondered how many of those lights were being watched by children who once hid in fear, now sleeping safely under a roof Lucia helped provide. That thought alone filled him with quiet gratitude. He wasn't thinking of fame or movies or the cameras that would still try to capture his every move. Those things had faded into the background. What mattered now were the lives connected through compassion lives that had collided by chance, yet changed the world in their own small way. He could almost hear Lucia's voice in his memory, calm but determined. Even when no one's watching, we keep going. He smiled at the echo of her words. She was right. The greatest victories rarely made the news. They lived quietly in the moments people never saw. A child's laughter returning after years of silence. A mother's tears of relief when she realized her child was safe. A man standing by his window, understanding that kindness, not power, was the only real legacy worth leaving. Keanu turned off the lights and let the moon cast its soft glow across the room. The world outside no longer looked like a place full of strangers. It looked like a web of souls, fragile, connected, capable of light. He whispered to himself, "Heroism isn't about being seen, it's about seeing." The night grew deeper, and the house settled into stillness. His phone buzzed again, this time with a reply from Lucia. 2 words appeared on the screen. Always, Keanu. He locked the phone and stood in silence for a long time. Somewhere in the city, Lucia was probably checking on the children one last time before bed. Maybe Elena was reviewing homework for her next college exam. Maybe Rosa was dreaming of becoming a teacher. Each of them, in their own way, was carrying the light forward. Keanu looked up at the sky again and whispered, "One more child at a time." He turned away from the window and walked toward the living room, where an old framed photograph sat on a side table. It was from the foundation's first day. Lucia, Elena, and a handful of smiling children. He touched the frame gently, as though reminding himself that some of the most extraordinary moments in life are born from the simplest acts of care. He thought about how everything had started not with a plan, not with fame, but with curiosity and compassion. And that thought carried one final truth. Sometimes, the smallest step into someone else's darkness becomes the light that saves you too. The house was quiet, the city still humming faintly in the distance. Keanu took one last look out the window before turning in for the night. The words of Lucia's speech replayed softly in his mind. "Someone chose to see me." He smiled as he whispered, "And I'll keep seeing." If this story touched your heart, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe kindness can change the world, hit like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can bring light where it's needed most.